Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast from still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. Joining me down there in Decatur, Georgia, my good friend, fellow University of North Georgia alumni and host of Georgia Voice of College Football, Matt Green. Matt, good evening, sir. How are you?
Good evening, sir. It is good to be back with you after a full slate of college football yesterday, even if it may have been underwhelming from a spectator perspective, but I still thought it was a lot of fun.
I couldn't be I don't think I could be. I don't know. You and I are kind of the same, where I'm a lurker on social media, Matt Green. There's two types of people, the lurkers and the posters. I'm not a poster. I don't think you're a poster. I just wonder how many people woke up today, like it just exhausted, because they were very online for the last 48 hours. Like the national college football folks, like fighting narratives and just fighting with fans who think Ole Miss should have been in Alabama. Everything's a referendum. Everything is broken. Everything can't be fixed, and just fighting with different fan bases. And like, it just felt very emotionally charged this weekend for a lot of different fan bases, for the national CFB folks. Like, it kind of just made me sad, where I'm like, y'all gotta log off, man. Like, there's so many people just need to log off, because it was just like, it felt like a battleground. Like, I was watching Game of Thrones on the Twitter timeline here this weekend, Matt, because just so many people were they were tweeting through it, man. And so it just, I don't know. I'm not that guy. I watched the game with the Thomas family group chat, and I'll text in that. But outside of that, I mean, you don't have to post through it, guys. Like, you got to take a breather. Like, enjoy the games for what they are. Like, it's your first 12-team playoff ever. Obviously, all the home favorites won, and the games weren't great by and large. But, like, man, just enjoy some. Like, I just am like, y'all, there was a lot of people who were just emotionally charged and angry. And I just wonder how many college football folks are just exhausted on this Sunday, because I don't know, man. That's just not me, and it doesn't feel like it's you either.
No, I'm more of a see something, say something kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
No, I see something, I'm like, okay, that's a bad take. I got to chime in, more than starting the conversation.
See, I don't have that in me. I'm like, no, I jot it down, and then I'll mention it to somebody else offline, where I'm like, did you see so-and-so? And then we'll talk about it. But I don't engage the conversation.
But also in terms of during a game, I'm definitely not online during a game.
Yeah.
Like, I'm locked in. Maybe I might not even be that active in the group chat during a game. Like, just whoever I'm watching the game with, I'm talking to and everything. But yeah, and I feel like just a lot of the arguments that are happening too, I don't feel like they're good faith arguments personally. Like, I think there's some problems with the college football playoff, but like with Lane Kiffin chiming in and stuff, and just so many people chiming in after some of these games. Like, I feel like you might be right for the wrong reasons, kind of thing. Like, I don't buy your argument, even if there are changes that need to be made with the format.
Yeah, and it's just, can we get through the first game before everyone's just like, and what I said about the soul is like the hate for Indiana. And Tennessee obviously gets boat raced here on Saturday night in Ohio State. Like, and Indiana played Ohio State better than Tennessee did. But it's just like, it's the first round. Like, they're like the favorites won, so it really doesn't matter. And people are like, oh, Alabama would have they would have matched up better in that Notre Dame spot. I would have rather seen them. I'm like, Alabama lost to a 6-6 Oklahoma team who got put in a blender at Vanderbilt. They got put in a blender in Norman. Like, you don't know these. Like, someone had this funny thing about, like, the SEC hypotheticals are undefeated, like the 1,000-0 like SEC hypothetical games, where it's like, if Alabama's in that spot, if insert SEC team I like is in that spot, they win big. And it's like, well, no, because I think everything goes back to the Alabama dominance and Georgia dominance of late. Every other SEC team like takes that as like the power of the conference, and it's like, well, it's been a couple teams atop the conference that have kind of held that moniker up. It's mostly been a couple. You can count them on one hand, and it's not even the full 5 fingers. So there's a lot of folks who are grouping them in of like, oh, that would have been the SEC strength of schedule, and the SEC this, the SEC that. I'm like, well, I don't think that's always the case there.
The main point about the SEC also is it's whoever is the best team that comes out of this conference.
Yeah.
is pretty much always winning the national championship. It doesn't mean they're going to win every bowl game.
But the fourth or fifth best team?
Yeah, like there's plenty of years where the third, fourth best team in the SEC is gettable. But the team at the top of the SEC almost always goes on to win the national championship.
Yeah. Which I'm okay with.
They don't lose to another SEC team.
Right. And if you're propping up Texas or Georgia right now, like I get it. But I also look at it as like, can we not just a team that lost a fourth of their games or a third? What is it? Fourth of their games, right? Going 9-3. What is that? Is that math? Am I doing that right off the top of my head? Is
9-3 is losing 25% of your games.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like we're splitting hairs here. Like it's so silly. Where I'm like, why are we like? If you just Ole Miss, I thought Ole Miss was maybe the best team in the SEC this year. You still lost to Kentucky at home. Like that's just a bad loss. And Alabama. You got boat raced in Norman against a terrible offense. You lost at Vanderbilt for the first time in forever. Like, no one's like, it is what it is. And I think some people have made a good point this weekend of like, blowouts were a thing before the 12-team playoff. Like, blowouts in the playoffs are just a very common occurrence in college football, and it's going to happen. Not every game is going to be 23-17, and it's not this referendum on all these teams didn't need to be there. And the one bigger thing I do agree with more than anything is it's like, just because they got blown out in the playoff doesn't mean they didn't belong there to begin with. It proved that they weren't good enough to advance and win a national title, but their body of work up until that point was good enough. So they had an opportunity. They failed. Indiana had an opportunity. They failed. SMU had an opportunity. They failed. Clemson had an opportunity. They failed. Tennessee had an opportunity to go and prove why they should have been hosting over Ohio State. They failed. So it's just, to me, it's like, okay, they all deserve to be in, but the result is what it is. Like, they all got blown out. So now we all know those 4 teams could not win the national title. Those 4 teams were not good enough to make a deep run. But this whole, if we put Team X in here and we're splitting hairs with like the 16th best team in the country and like the 13th, and I'm like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Well, and my thing is, the 2 different conversations are happening because I do think like a lot of those teams didn't belong in the playoff. But that's
when you say didn't belong, what do you mean by that, though?
Let me finish. That's what I'm saying, because we had no business going to 12 to begin with.
Yeah.
Like none of these teams. That's why when we're talking about 4, it's like, yeah, it may have been tough to find the 4th best team, but if whoever we chose and we look at the 5th best team that got left out, whether it was Penn State or Tennessee or Ohio State, none of those teams had a legitimate argument of like, what? We got robbed. We should have been in the national, so it's like, it would have been controversial, whoever you had at 4, but I don't think we needed 12. So that's one thing. I'm not here, like you said, for Ole Miss and Alabama and South Carolina arguing. It's just, you guys didn't lose to a bunch of top 10 teams. That's not why you're out. You lost to bad teams. Like that's the reason you guys didn't make the playoff. It was very easy for you guys in week 10. You had a very easy, clear road to getting to the college football playoff, and you lost to a bad team down the stretch. Like, so I'm not here for those teams arguing about getting in.
Yeah.
But what's funny to me is people still don't get the SEC conversation. It's like with Ohio State fans, like I've seen so much trash talk towards the SEC. It's like, what'd you think about that, SEC fans? And it's like, dude, you think we're losing sleep over Tennessee losing? Like, no, we don't like Tennessee. It's a real win-win situation the SEC has going on. They can successfully talk out of both sides of their mouth. So if that SEC team goes up to Columbus and wins, you're like, this conference, man, it's just different down here. You guys don't understand. And then if they lose, they're like, well, yeah, that's one of the teams we hate. They lost. Now we're going to troll them online. Like, what are you talking about? Are you talking trash to us? We're happy about this.
I think that's fair. It's one of those where I saw there were like Ohio State, like that SEC stuff, was just, it was funny because look, I mean, Tennessee can't say anything. They got just obliterated in Columbus last night. We'll get into that here in a second, but it's also like, come on, know the history here, y'all. Like Ohio State, like they've beaten Alabama. They've won big games. Cardell Jones, Cardell Jones can talk on Twitter. Cardell won. Like Cardell can do that. So when people are going after him, like Cardell can do that. He's the guy who won for Ohio State and beat an SEC school. But it's not like Ohio State has this great track record.
Eddie George can't talk since he lost. Well, we don't.
He's the coach of Tennessee State. So
no, I saw Eddie George post him on social media.
Oh, did he post something? I didn't see Eddie George saying that.
Neyland Stadium North, kind of smirking or whatever, walking down the stadium.
That's the other part, which is funny to me. Like the people. Okay, here's my Tennessee rant that I need to get off my chest here.
Okay.
The nonsense that I did see that almost had me tweet and not be a lurker on social media last night were people making fun of the Vol fans taking over Neyland North, taking over Ohio Stadium last night. That was insane. Like to make fun of a fan base coming together like that and making the trip, it's 5.5 hours north, and to overtake that stadium where you have Kirk Herbstreit, an Ohio State guy, and you have people all over. You have Ross Dellinger, you have Pat Forty, you have people from all over the country who cover this sport who are like, I've never seen anything like this. Like, I've never seen a visiting team take over. This is a playoff game. This is Ohio State. This should not happen. This is outrageous. I didn't think it was going to be this to this extent. I thought Tennessee was going to come through for like 20% maybe. From people you read and talk to, it's like 60-40. Like, Tennessee almost made up half that building. There was so much orange, especially even in the lower level. Like, it was shameful what Ohio State put out.
It was really just that lower level that was like, that
it was
lower level
strong,
on one side was like pretty orange. And then
Georgia's never doing that. To be clear, Georgia fans are never doing that. Like, when they went to Notre Dame, it wasn't like that. No, 40%. I'm talking like this was a takeover. You had like Tennessee fans should be celebrated for what they did and what they pulled off this weekend. Clowning Tennessee fans for coming through and making the trip and taking over game day the way they did.
They lost.
I mean, but that's not their fault. That's not Tennessee fans' fault for making the trip. That just shows how special this fan base is. Like, I just think it's such a weird thing to dunk on a fan base that is that passionate and follows through, where they spent the week trolling Ohio State bars, playing Rocky Top, and they backed it up. Like, Tennessee fans said
it up.
The fan base, because they were like, oh, you're not going to do it. The fans like, oh, yeah, I'm sure it's going to be like 30 to 40% Tennessee fans. Like, well, I'll see it when I believe it. And then they bought all the tickets, and then they all came. There are people in very, very cold conditions. This wasn't even a nice game to go to. This is cold. They sat in the cold. Tennessee fans deserve all kinds of credit for what they did this weekend. They did their part. Tennessee fans deserve to be celebrated. So the people who are mocking Tennessee fans for making this trip and taking over the way they did is silly, because it's coming from a lot of fan bases that would not be able to pull off that same kind of feat. Tennessee fans did something on the road in this playoff game in a gigantic atmosphere in a playoff spot that you'll never see again. Like, this was unbelievable stuff from the Volunteer fan base. It's just no other fan base can do this. No,
Georgia literally did this.
No, they didn't. No.
I mean, I don't know what the numbers were, but it was pretty obvious.
How many seats does Notre Dame even hold?
Notre Dame, I mean, that doesn't matter.
It does. That's thousands of thousands of seats that you didn't have to account for.
Notre Dame's probably like 85,000. It's a huge stadium.
That's 20,000 different.
I'm just that's how big as the stadium is. It changed.
That's what I'm saying.
It's huge.
Because it's a big difference.
It changed Notre Dame's ticket policy because of the way the Georgia fans took over the stadium, though. Like that's all I'm saying.
Ross Bjork, the AD, had to come out for Ohio State. This was a disaster for Ohio State.
It's just funny because this was a disaster for Ohio State. Are you kidding me? They just blasted.
No. I'm talking about like the look. That was an embarrassing look for that fan base to allow that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because Paul Feinbaum on some show I was listening to said that he does a college football show, and he spent all week talking to hundreds of Tennessee fans, and not one of them actually talked about the game. Like, the only thing Tennessee fans talked about was the fans and taking over the stadium and making the drive. And
well, they don't control the game.
Bars and everything. It's just, I don't know. It's funny how much the Tennessee fans, give them credit. They're a great fan base, sure. But it's like,
I think it's the strongest in the country right now. It is the strongest in the country.
I mean, that's cool, I guess. Like, I don't know. It's there's more to it than that. I
was just very impressed, and take shots at the team all you want in terms of like what they did on the field on Saturday. But I think taking shots at the fan base or like making fun of people spending a lot of money or doing whatever to come and support their team the way they did on Saturday, I think it's a loser mentality from some other fan bases.
Well, I mean, that's social media. It's the cesspool that is social media. Like, you're gonna troll people for spending a bunch of money and going and sitting in the cold.
Look at these Vol fans all coming together and having a really great, memorable time, bucket list situation.
memorable time. I don't think that was a great.
It's not all about the game,
time.
though. Remember, they got there early. They tailgated. They made memories. They got to go to the shoot for the first time. Tennessee never plays Ohio State. There's all
Do you
kinds of
remember-
memories. You don't win them all. That's just how
Do
it
you
goes.
remember
How many
these-
Georgia fans are in the Richt era? Like, how many gut-punching losses did you have to experience before you got the big one? Look at the Kirby years early on
Yeah.
in the Dome. Like, how many of those fans who came in and were like, this is it, and then it
We
wasn't?
weren't celebrating because we showed up well.
You just
but
talked
did you
about
see-
showing up well against Notre
did
Dame.
you
That's
see how
before
many
the
fans
titles.
we had at the SEC championship. Like,
Hold on, were you
guys,
not proud of how you showed up in South Bend?
Yeah, but if Georgia doesn't win the game, it's not like a memorable.
Well, hold
moment
on.
for-
That's not. But it was still like it's an honor. You're like, oh, that's awesome. Georgia fans made the trip, and they were like, we're gonna win or lose. It was awesome that we made the trip to South Bend, and those were both close games.
Yeah,
you could have
those
easily lost either of
people-
those games.
Those people that went to the stadium are going to have individual they had some fun while they were in Chicago or something, and then
Well,
made
and
the
just
trip to Notre
seeing the
Dame.
stadium
But
and making a
it's
trip and
like
going with
that-
friends and family.
That trip is not. It's not your all-time trip as a Georgia fan if Georgia loses the game. It's just you didn't take over the stadium because Ohio State won. Like if Tennessee wins that game, then yeah, you went up there and took over the stadium. But it's not.
Tennessee's
it's not
fans can't play right tackle for John Campbell and Dane Davis in this game, Matt Green. What do you want them to do?
Of course, but that's why you didn't take over the stadium. Maybe you won the battle of the fans, but you lost the war. Like you didn't take it over.
Well, fans did what they could. Fans did their part. Tennessee, that's the broader point. Tennessee fan base did their part this week in the last couple weeks. So hats off to the fan base.
The last thing I was gonna say, we kind of started the Tennessee conversation. We still got to get more into the Tennessee conversation.
No, we can leave it as is.
But what I was gonna say about when we're talking about the playoff, like those teams that I feel like shouldn't have been in 9 through 12, it's like none of those teams had like a big time win that just had like a resume that they could hang their hat on. So it was just the biggest problem in this whole thing was the conference realignment. I think if the conference realignment doesn't happen and we get the 12-team playoff, I don't think we see these lopsided schedules in conferences because like Indiana goes 11-1 and beats a 7-win Michigan team. That's like their best win of the whole season. Like I didn't even realize looking at SMU's schedule of how many of the top half of the ACC they avoided, and Louisville and Duke were like two of the closest games they had all year. Like those aren't great teams. Like that's SMU's two best wins the whole season. Clemson's best win is SMU. So it's like none of the Tennessee beat Alabama, and then kind of a lot of other questionable teams that they had some average wins, lost to Arkansas, lost to Georgia, but like none of those teams really had a big time win to hang their hat on. And it's just, I feel like they shouldn't have been playing for a national championship. Like, yeah. And I don't even know how much fun it was. It was fun for me, I guess. I'm a college football fan and I got together with my friends and watched it, but I would have had as much fun, I guess, watching 1 versus 8, whatever. And I think we lose something. We increase the value of those November games where number 8 might be playing number 14. But we had 2 top 5 matchups in the SEC championship and the Big Ten this year. And those games didn't really matter. Like, yeah, they got the home field advantage. They were the first round bye and everything. But if Oregon, Penn State was to get to the Final Four, or Texas, Georgia was to get to the Final Four, and that's the playoff, like, I think that's what we lost with the expansion, personally.
That's fair. Well, let's actually dive into what happened in this game here, Matt Green. What was your strongest takeaway? I mean, this is your moment, Matt, because you were on this program a couple days ago saying that what happens if Tennessee gets down 21-0, like that's possible with their slow starts, and I was wrong here, and I did not think there was a path to Tennessee getting blown out in this game. And Tennessee dug themselves a crazy hole. You also kind of wonder what happens if Tennessee doesn't get that sack reversed on the face mask on that opening drive from Ohio State, because Ohio State ends up driving down the field and scoring a touchdown. It was 3rd and long. Yeah. Bryson Eason gets a sack, but it's taken away because he grabs the face mask, and it's a 1st and 10, and Ohio State. It was
the right call.
No, I'm not saying it wasn't the right call, but you get off the field quickly, and who knows what the game looks like and how it unfolds.
That was like 2 plays, right?
Yeah.
It was like 2 plays for like 50 yards right after that.
Yes. So it felt like a backbreaker of a moment where you're like, oh, now you're in a hole, because you were going to get off the field early and have some momentum, and instead it goes the other way, and it gets ugly in a hurry. But what was your strongest takeaway here from Tennessee, Ohio State last night?
Yeah, I appreciate you tooting my horn over there, so I don't have to toot it myself. But this
Well,
game
my
just
dad was
went.
also right there with you, so it's all a Thomas tooting of the horn for
Hey, I
Matt
appreciate
Green.
Bob Thomas always listening. But this game, yeah, it went so much like I thought it was gonna go because like we've talked about Georgia this year, like they won the damn SEC, and I still don't know how good they are. Some of these less tested teams like Texas and Tennessee, there's just so few good wins on their schedule this year that I wasn't sure what those teams were like truly made of. And there's also like the hypo kind of maybe it's a history now. I'll get into it. I have a stat, but I'll get into it like with Tennessee teams going on the road. But there was just I compared this game to the 2021 Orange Bowl with Georgia and Michigan. For everyone who doesn't remember, the year Georgia loses to Alabama in the SEC championship and then blows out Michigan in the semifinal in the very next game. There was just so much negativity. Kirby Smart hadn't won a national championship to that point. He's made whatever quote unquote wrong quarterback decisions multiple times, according to some people, to that point. And then Stetson Bennett comes out. They play their best game of the entire year, and I felt like the negativity was going to just kind of galvanize Ohio State. And like you saw, like this team is super talented. Like the team I watched play last night, like that might be the best team in college football. Like this was the best, most dominant performance they had all season. Just both sides of the ball, like 4 sacks. And we've seen this a lot, like in a lot of, especially when Tennessee's gone on the road of in pass protection. Like they've been able to run the ball well in most of their games, but pass protection's been questionable most of the season. At least especially when they played the better defenses. And Ohio State just got after Nico this whole game. Like Nico played like he was their entire offense. Like I feel like I wouldn't even say Nico played poorly, but Tennessee was just getting dominated, that he was having to do everything. And while he was making a lot of plays with his legs and doing all he could do, it was just, they were just overwhelmed. And then these receivers for Ohio State were just kind of exposing all the weaknesses that Tennessee had, really.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Nico was your big bright spot here. Nico is a warrior, man. Like 20 carries is crazy, especially against that Ohio State front. He had a drive where he had 6 carries. I think it was a touchdown drive for him, where on the same drive he had 6 carries. Like Nico had to make something out of nothing. Guys weren't open down the field. The receivers had a brutal day. Like it was just across the board. The receivers, I mean, Squirrel doesn't play many snaps in this one. He leaves. Dante Thornton can't finish the game. He's out. I mean, the snap counts, let me pull that up. Their snap counts, which cannot happen. So I mean, injuries are part of the game, but 25 snaps for Dante Thornton, 16 snaps for Dylan Sampson, 16 snaps for Squirrel White. Like, those are 3 key guys that could not go basically last night. And it's hard to win games already on the road when you don't have that many playmakers available. I mean, they had a true freshman, Braylon Staley, who has redshirted this year, and these don't count for against redshirt. So he plays, and they have multiple receivers in the portal, so he had to play. He had 51 snaps. He hasn't played at all this year, and he had 51 snaps in this game in the slot. So I think Tennessee was really outmanned at just the skill positions, just with the injuries, like 2 carries, 6 yards for Dylan Sampson. It was just brutal to not have him in this spot. But Nico rushes for 2 touchdowns. I think what you saw, part of one of the positives going to 25 is like Nico's grown down the stretch. He didn't turn the ball over. He didn't throw any picks. He did what he could, man. Like Nico is a gamer. Like he broke his helmet, took a cracked helmet at one point in this game early on. Like Nico is a tough, smart football player. Like Nico, I think, made some good throws in this game when he could, but the problem is he was running for his life. Like John Campbell was the lowest graded offensive player for Tennessee in this game. Dane Davis was right there at the bottom. So the right tackle spot was just a turnstile all game long. Nico was running for his life from Sawyer and company.
Nico also didn't necessarily play well, though. Like
I think he played well given the circumstances, because that was probably the worst wide receiver game Tennessee's had all year, and probably the worst tackle game they've had since, like, offensive tackle game since Oklahoma. So I think given the circumstances and him being a redshirt freshman and the only underclassman of the Power 2 in this in the CFP right now, I thought he handled himself extremely well in this environment because he could have imploded and he didn't. And he kept going and he kept taking shots and he kept making plays when nothing was there. Like, what do you want him to do? The receivers weren't getting any separation and his offensive line was getting whipped all game long. And he didn't have his number one player on offense. Dylan Sampson wasn't available. So it's like, what do you want him to do? He's that part of what
about Carson Beck right now.
Well, no, Carson Beck has 3 years on Nico? 4 years?
No, I'm talking about just the certain games Georgia's had this year where the receivers are bad, the offensive line is bad, and everything.
But this is why, this is my analogy I've said all year with Nico, and what people have to understand about a young quarterback is look at what the Chiefs did, right? They had Tyreek Hill, they had Kelsey in his prime. They maximize young guys, smart NFL teams. When they draft a rookie quarterback they believe in, they spend a bunch of money around him on offense. They want to give him as much help as possible so that when he is ready to go and is 5 to 6 years in, he can be the guy where he throws guys open. He understands NFL defenses and he can win with less, right? You can pay him more and win with less around him. You can't do it this way where Tennessee, like Nico had the worst weapons around him this season that any quarterback has had in the Josh Heupel era. Even Joe Milton had better weapons last year than what Nico was dealing with. The offensive line took a step back. This was the worst year of the offensive line for sure. This was the worst year of the receiving core for sure. And when you build your your whole offensive identity is wrapped up in one player, and that one player is not available in the playoff, you're going to be in for some problems. Like that just not having Dylan Sampson, it hurt, especially in the second half with him being a second half guy and Tennessee getting back in the game at the end of the second quarter. Like Tennessee shut out Ohio State 10-0 in the second quarter and got back into it, get the ball back in the second half. Like they had a sliver of an opening and nothing happened. And I think Nico was far the least of Tennessee's problems. And I think I'm optimistic about Nico going into 25. But he's got to get more help. Like I'm optimistic to a point where I'm like, the receivers are just, it was just bad. Like it's kind of amazing now that we have 2 full seasons that the Tennessee vertical passing game has been non-existent. Like Tennessee's passing game the last 2 years has been bad. A lot of people gave Joe Milton a lot of grief last year, and I think he's been vindicated a little bit. Like Joe didn't play extremely well or anything, but there was a lot more going on, I think, than fans had anticipated, because now you have 2 years of evidence with 2 different quarterbacks, and it's basically been the same in terms of the vertical passing game and it being really non-existent. So this is a big offseason for Heupel and company, because the first 2 years, the offense top 10 in scoring, like throwing all over people. The last 2 years, it's been run heavy. It's been relying on Jalen Wright last year and relying on Dylan Sampson this year. And there's a ceiling. Like Heupel is a high floor coach. Like Tennessee has won 10 games twice in the last 3 years. He's winning 70% of his football games as the head coach of Tennessee. He has a high floor. But if you're going to break through, like you have to make adjustments this offseason. Like you can't have 3 straight years of just no vertical passing game in this kind of offense. Like you just can't. And you wonder how much of the vertical passing game issues is just teams are like, we're not giving you that anymore. You can run on us as much as you want up the middle, but we're not giving you the deep stuff anymore. We're not giving you these opportunities to slice and dice us with these explosive plays, because Tennessee didn't have any. And I said coming in this game, if Dante Thornton didn't have any big plays over the middle and any big touchdowns from these receivers, they weren't going to win. They're 0-2 this year when their receivers average less than 10 yards per reception. The receivers tonight averaged 7.4, lowest of the season. 14 receptions for 104 yards. The longest reception was 21 yards by Brew McCoy. Like, that's not a recipe for success. Like Chris Brazzell, the big Tulane transfer, bad drop, would have been a touchdown in this game. He's had a really rough year transferring him from Tulane. That's been a huge miss for Tennessee out of the portal. Like, it is what it is. Like at a certain point, like I think Tennessee can argue overachieved this year based on where this offense is, because I think this vertical passing game and where this offense is passing wise and the offensive tackles, they're in trouble. Like you've got to, like, this is a big offseason for them. David Sanders better be really ready to go at right tackle and get Lance Hurd back in, and he needs to get better. But Cooper Mace is gone. Like you're replacing your center who graded out number 2 player on Tennessee's offense yesterday. He's gone. 4-year starter. That's a big change for Tennessee.
We cannot say that Tennessee overachieved in any way.
I think so.
Year.
I think they overachieved. This offense, I mean, without a vertical passing game to win 10 games, make the college football playoff, I think they overachieved a little bit.
But that's the thing, is that they didn't achieve anything this year that they didn't achieve back in 2022. The only difference was they expanded the field. Like this team would have been ranked 9th or 8th or something in the final rankings, and it was a good 10-win season when you honestly didn't really beat that many good teams either. Like, so it felt like kind of a hollow 10-win season, and then you got to the college football playoff and you went up against an actual elite team and got like dominated. You know what I mean? Like in under Josh Heupel in the last 3 years, I'll take out year one because it's 0-5 if we go back to year one, but I'll take out 2021. If you go games against teams who finish top 10, Tennessee is 0-4 and with an average margin of 21 points per game, like losing by 21 points per game in those games. It's like, I feel like where Tennessee is right now. And I feel like the college football playoff just kind of makes their season feel better than it really was, because I don't really know what to do with this team and what they did in 2024. Like, I don't know truly what their identity was. Like, I don't know how many good offenses they played. Like Georgia, we criticized Georgia's offense all year, right? They put up a 30 spot, beat Tennessee by 2 touchdowns. Like Ohio State did whatever they wanted against Tennessee. And then there was a lot of games of a lot of bad quarterbacks you were going against. So the Alabama win, they still have that, but I do kind of question. I definitely can't say this team overachieved with especially when they lose to Arkansas. Like they're a potential 11-1 team that could have gone to the SEC championship with kind of an easier schedule in terms of, not one of the easiest by any means in the SEC, but not necessarily a gauntlet like some teams had to go through.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the road concerns are real. Because I mean, you have the LSU one, but that was an 11 a.m. Local kick, and Tennessee blasted LSU in that spot. So that was a big one. That's probably your biggest road win.
And they finished like 16th or 15th or something that year. So that was a good team. Won the West.
But it was an 11 a.m. kick. Like, it was different. Like, at night on the road in tough environments, like, this offense really, really struggled at Oklahoma. Like, that Oklahoma team, like, they were top 20 at the time, but that was not a top 25 team that Tennessee beat in Norman. So I think it's real. I think this is a big, big offseason. I'm curious what Heupel does, because the floor is so high and the sky's not falling. So it's very important to just be like, look at where you've been. Like, Heupel is winning a lot of games. It's been a very successful 4 years. This was still a successful season. You made the college football playoff. You're in a better spot. Like, Ole Miss fans and Alabama fans, you can make the jokes, but like, they would have rather been in where Tennessee was this year. Tennessee took care of business. They've lost one home game in the last 3 years. He's protected home field at an elite level. There's recruiting better, but recruiting's got to get better going into 2025. You got to hit the portal hard. Now, the safeties, like Will Brooks had a rough night, Jacoby Thomas, Andre Turrentine. The safeties, the linebackers got, it was the other stuff that I talked about, where I was like, coming into this game, if Will Howard's able to sit back and just dice this team up over the middle with these crossers and the pre-snap motion that was confusing these linebackers and safeties, like, Tennessee was going to be in trouble. And Tennessee, their linebackers had a rough night, and their safeties had a rough night, and you got to get better. So when you lose battles like Shady Hayward, the 4-star blue chipper who ends up at Florida instead of Tennessee, it's like, those are ones that, like, we'll see in a couple years if it comes back to bite Tennessee, but those are the guys you have to close on. Like, you have to bring in those difference makers in the back end to just get to hang with the Ohio State, to hang with the Oregons, hang with the Georgias, because right now it was just evident that there was a big talent gap on the field Saturday night between Ohio State and Tennessee. I mean, there are some good players like David Sanders. We'll see what he looks like. A lot of reasons for optimism there at right tackle. So hopefully that's solidified. Should help a lot next year if he's good right out of the gate for Tennessee to protect Nico in that regard. But man, you got to get better, and you got to get better at receiver. You got to get better at linebacker. You got to get better at safety. You got to get better on the offensive line. So still a successful year. It's a tough loss on Saturday night in Columbus, but it's gut check time. I'm very curious how Heupel approaches this offseason, because next year you go to Gainesville, you go to Tuscaloosa, you still got Georgia at home. Like, you're going to have to win a game that you shouldn't win to get back to the playoff next year. And to this point, Heupel has not been able to do that on the road or against Georgia. So if Tennessee's a playoff team next year, it's because certain things got cleaned up. The offensive line's better, and he figured some stuff out on offense. And I'm curious if this staff is the exact same going into next year, because, I don't know.
See, but that's the difference, though, is it doesn't necessarily mean that. Like, Tennessee might not clean those things up, and they're still the 9th best team in the country, and they do make the playoff. So I'm sound like I'm bashing Josh Heupel, but this is kind of a good thing, and this is what we've talked about.
Josh
for a couple
Heupel is a
years.
good coach. He just has to make now the tough decisions to get to great coach. It's like, are you going to be great?
And this is what I talked about a couple years ago, which I think is a good thing for the sport. It's that Josh Heupel, 2 more years of Josh Heupel, say he does exactly what he did in 2023 and 24, in 2025 and 26, right? 9-win season, 10-win season, make the playoff. In the 4-team format, he's fired. Like, thanks for elevating the program, but this isn't enough. We want to win the SEC. We want to get to an SEC championship. We want to actually get to a Final Four, or get to a college football playoff. I think in the old format, it's over, and he's kind of run his course, and he's done a good job, but we want more. But in this new 12-team format, I think, now it's a tangible accomplishment. Like, hey, we made the college football playoff. Like, we played this big game. Like, it's something you can recruit on. But I think for a guy who's consistently recruiting the 10th ranked class in the country, that sounds good until you realize it's the 6th or 7th best class in the SEC, and you're missing that 4-team playoff. Like, I don't think that guy keeps his job in the old format. So maybe this is a good thing ultimately, and it keeps good coaches from just getting fired every couple of years ago because they're not great coaches. But and maybe they win one of those first round games and when they get back next time or something. But I think so I sound like I'm bashing Josh Heupel, but it's not. I'm not calling for his job or anything.
Yeah, you can't call for his job. The Heupel's too good. Like, the floor has been raised too much. But that doesn't mean you can't now start to expect some changes, because now you've got 2 years. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is you have 2 years of data of a problem with your offense throwing the football. And when you've invested in a 5-star quarterback, like Nico, you have 5-star receivers now. You have 5-star offensive tackles now. Like, at some point, this has to change. I think you can't have 3 straight years of suboptimal passing offenses when you're an offensive coach. Like, that means you have to evolve. You have to adapt. Like, Georgia, they had 1 bad year on offense with Coley, and Kirby was like, nope, we're going to get Monken. You just have to, Nick Saban was like, I got to change my offense. I don't want to change my offensive philosophy. Like, I was winning with the A.J. McCarron, Greg McElroy model, but I got to change with the times. So he brings in Lane Kiffin. That he keeps evolving. You have to keep evolving and understand. You can't be just so obsessed with your scheme or your coaches are. There's a loyalty aspect to this, right? Where part of the issue with Mullen at Florida was the Grantham stuff, where you were attached to Grantham for a little bit too long. Lincoln Riley was attached to Alex Grinch as his DC at USC a little too long. Where it's like, we have years of data now where these defenses are not good, or these offenses are not good, and there's something to be said about loyalty, but you can't, the passing game has to be better next year. You've invested too much. The passing game has to flip. It has to be good.
The thing about a Dan Mullen or a Paul Johnson is what they were doing on their side was still working well. It's they were just the overall CEO of the program. They were not doing what needed to be done on big picture stuff. But with Heupel, now that's what's gotten kind of weird, is with what this defense improved in 2023 and how good they were in 2024. Now you've had 2 years in a row where the offense isn't very good. I don't really know where to go from there. I think it's I think legitimate. You don't have to call for his job, but legitimate questions can start to be asked about Heupel and what the ceiling truly is of his Tennessee program, and that's what's going to put him under more pressure in 2025, especially 2025. I think 2025 becomes a massive year. Obviously they got Faison, I think is his name, the recruit. The recruit committed, but high schoolers, who knows what's going to happen with high schoolers, right? And how many times they can decommit or anything like that, or just not pan out. Nico appears to be a good quarterback. I think there's still questions. Well, I'll say this. Now the season is over, through 13 games, I would say Nico was a below average quarterback in the SEC. I would say average to below average.
I think he was average. I don't think he
might have
average.
upside of being a good quarterback, but right now he still doesn't appear to be like that good of a quarterback. So maybe he takes that step next year. And if he takes that step next year, is that the only good year you get of Nico? Because he goes to the league if he has a good year next year.
Well, hold on. He was better than Peyton Thorne. He was better than Graham Mertz. He was better
I don't
than
know that
Jackson
he was better
Arnold.
than Graham Mertz.
He was better than Jackson Arnold. He was better, I think, over the course of the year, he was better than Taylor Green. Definitely better than Vandegrift. Sailors was better. I think he was better over the last 6 games than Pavia.
I'm giving it to Pavia.
I can't do that.
I mean, you look at his actual numbers in SEC games and like versus like good teams. Like he didn't really do anything. Like for the most part, he didn't turn the ball over in those big games.
Are you talking about Pavia or Nico?
He had a lot of 0 touchdown, 0 pick games against ranked teams.
Yeah. Van Buren, he was better than Van Buren. Dart, obviously. I think Dart was the best quarterback in the SEC this year.
Yeah, I don't think there was a lot of good quarterback. If you're judging just like where does he rank in the 16, like me might be in the upper echelon, but it's like after Jackson Dart,
but he was also one of the youngest. Like you look around the conference, they're all older. Like he was one of the few redshirt freshman starters. Like he was a young player.
No, that's fair, but I think Lagway
had a bad bowl game. Did you watch that this weekend? I mean, Lagway, he was all right. Lagway had some growing pains down the stretch. He wasn't perfect.
No, I definitely think Lagway is. I feel like, what is the expression? Putting the cart before the horse.
Yes.
I feel like we're doing the same thing with Lagway that we did with Nico.
And we'll see with Gunnar Stockton. What does Gunnar Stockton look like over a full game?
Who knows? Gunnar Stockton, I have no idea where he could be. Connor Shaw or something. I have no idea what to expect out of Gunnar Stockton, but I have somewhat of an idea what to expect out of Gunnar Stockton. But yeah, when he's the actual guy running the offense and we have no idea something around him, we don't really know. But I'm just saying over the course of the season, the SEC, like Nico wasn't like a great quarterback. Everyone was kind of waiting for him to become that, and maybe he does. But I think it kind of puts Tennessee in a weird position and Josh Heupel in a weird position. This was your golden goose, right? Like this was the guy that's going to take the program to the next level. And you have this elite running game, elite defense with your quarterback just kind of being average for the most part and flashing. He's an athletic guy.
But it's a whole thing. Like the receivers in the offensive line, especially the tackles, were not good for the most of this year. So it's hard for me to evaluate Nico because I think his situation sucked for the most of the year.
And it's Josh Heupel's offense, right? It's like that's why it's like why this offense is supposed to be a cheat code. So this guy's a 5-star quarterback. If we've got a cheat code with a 5-star,
he's just young, man. How many redshirt freshmen were thriving this year at quarterback?
No, that's fair, but I mean he's the number 1 player in the country. Like
that's fine. I'm just saying Arch hasn't even played yet. Arch, we still haven't seen.
A lot of people, if you remember, that were saying like this guy was going to be the best quarterback in college football this year.
He still can next year. Tom
Fornelli said that.
He has the talent. Like he still has the arm talent. He has the moxie. That's the main thing. Is Nico is a winner. Like that dude is a competitive. Like you can't question his like competitive spirit. Nico is. I think if you're a Vol fan, the thing that makes you most excited, you always knew he had the arm talent and everything else. His size, his frame, he's a huge kid, but he just takes these shots and he evolved over the course of the year. He doesn't turn the ball over. He's a gamer, man. He was not afraid of those Georgia and Ohio State fronts and was running at them, taking shots and kept getting back up, man. I just think that dude is a massive competitor. And I think people did not expect it because they did he's a Southern California kid. What's he going to be like in cold weather? And then he proceeds to have great games in cold weather. He
did not have a great game against Ohio State.
Vanderbilt was 30 degrees.
Dude, why are we talking about Vanderbilt?
I'm just saying, like he can. It's more than Nico. Nico is the furthest thing of my concern because if the stuff around Nico gets better, Nico is going to be just fine. I think Nico is going to be a good quarterback at Tennessee. I think he was good for the second half of this season. Now, can he be a great one? I think it is out of his hands. I really do. I think the receivers have to get better and the offensive line has to get better because if that doesn't we don't see a big upgrade in those departments going into next year, then there's a ceiling on what he can ultimately be because it's like, what do you want him to do? Like football, all 11 guys matter. And there is just something to be said where I'm like, I don't know. Like I think the receivers and the tackles have to be significantly better next year for Nico to be a Heisman type guy.
No, and I think that's definitely true. But when it comes to the big games that Tennessee had this year, like Nico didn't necessarily ball out in any of those games.
Second half against Alabama, he balled out. Second half against Florida, he played well.
I mean, Georgia and Ohio State, those were not good games.
He balled out against Vanderbilt.
Yeah, we're calling that a big game.
Alabama lost. Jalen Milroe got set. He had all kinds of problems at Vanderbilt. Tennessee didn't.
Tennessee locked down Jalen Milroe. Absolutely. Yeah. The defense, absolutely.
No, I'm saying Jalen Milroe had problems against Vanderbilt. And Nico did not.
But it was still like a 40-something game, right? I mean, they scored a bunch of points.
No, he ran for like 20 yards. Jalen Milroe barely ran against Vanderbilt. He struggled.
Are you sure about that?
Yes. Hold on.
Alabama at least scored a lot of points in that game. Like there's a lot of games where Tennessee's offense just didn't really do much, and this especially when they played the best teams on their schedule. Like I don't know. I think the reason I worry about Nico is because I think there's still clearly a long ways to go. This guy has to be like an NFL quarterback, but
he ran for 84
yards,
year, 21 times, so 4 yards to carry.
So yeah, that's a solid game. That's better than what.
Oh wait, no, that's the whole team. The whole team ran for 84 yards. Hold on, sorry. This is great radio.
Yeah, I was in the middle of the whole thing. You just cut me off here.
I'm sorry. Like you said that, and I'm like, I'm not taking crazy pills. Like his numbers were not good against Vanderbilt on the ground, and I'm trying to find it. This is driving me nuts. Okay, keep going though.
But that's just what I'm saying about Nico. It's like maybe he does take the step next year, but that's the 1 year you have of him. If he does take that step next year, is Tennessee ready to win a national championship next year around Nico? Probably not, right?
No, but Miller ran 7 times for 10 yards against Vanderbilt.
All right. That's fine. But
I'm just saying. I was like, I know I'm not taking crazy pills. I knew Vanderbilt shut down Milroe. He didn't have a good game.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't care about the Vanderbilt game. Like that's not what Tennessee's season's been.
I just can't believe how much you're focusing on Nico. It's just the Nico stuff is just not the furthest from my mind. Like I'm not worried about Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee. What I am worried about is the tackles being better. What I'm worried about is the receivers being better. What I'm worried about is the things that will get that Nico needs to get to that final point. Like Nico's done his job. It's like from Mark Wahlberg in The Departed, where he's like, I'm the guy who does his job. You must be the other guy. That's Nico last night. Nico showed up. Nico did all he could. Nico did his job.
But see, like I would say like a Cade Klubnik last night. Like that's someone who was like running for his life, and he like actually made plays. Like Nico was running for his life. He's been
playing football for 3 years.
He threw for like 300 yards.
He started as a true freshman, Matt. He's been playing 3 years. He's got like 40 games.
I don't want to hear about an experience. This guy's played a whole season. I'm just saying
it matters.
It was twofold though. Like I'm not saying
Hendon Hooker was like 24 when he had his Heisman type year. Like it's just
of course. I'm just saying that the conversation about Nico is twofold because he ultimately we established he was not good this year. He was average. He was not like a good college quarterback this year. Next year, if he does take that step, he's probably going to the league. And from what it sounds like, he's probably not going to have the supporting cast to win a national championship.
Still too early to say.
So Nico's, it's too early to say. A lot can happen in the portal and all that. But I think Tennessee's definitely going to need to do things in the portal. The way you're talking about the offensive line, the way you're talking about the receivers, like that's Nico has a good
they're
year,
betting on the inside.
The pros, like that's it. That's all you got out of Nico.
Well, we'll see. Nico is not a guarantee. Like guys are getting a lot of money to stay for another year, and it depends. Like, what if Nico gets very close? He could come back. He could do 3 years. I think in this era of NIL, everything else, I don't think it's a guarantee that these guys always just leave. Carson Beck came back.
But if he has the year that you expect him to kind of have, that kind of guy.
I think it depends on how close they get to a national title.
Yeah.
Like, what if they make the playoff and they win a couple games and Nico, I don't know, he's close where they're like, you're a borderline first round, but not for sure. If you come back, then make good money and try and be the number 1 overall and win a title. Like, I don't know how Nico's wired. He might be back. You might get 3 years. I'm not saying it's it for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me in this era if you got 3 years in Nico.
If he plays like he played this year, then he's definitely coming back in 2026 because I don't think this guy would go pro.
All right, we're way ahead of ourselves. Like, there's just so much that can happen and from now to the 2026 season. But
I don't know. I'm just saying, if he plays like he played this year, this guy's not going pro.
All right, redshirt freshman.
Not after that year. might be going pro in something.
I
other
can't
than
believe how
sports.
much you focused on Nico in this. This is unbelievable.
No, Nico was a warrior and all that. I'm just saying the whole conversation, like next year, that's the shot with them. I think.
We'll see. All home teams though ultimately win and cover. What does that say about the first round here for you, Matt Green?
I don't know. I think obviously everyone wants to just poop on Boise State, on SMU and Indiana and all these teams that lost. I was trying to keep myself clean over here, you know.
Somehow poop was worse.
Poop did feel worse. Poop mouth, you got poop coming out of your mouth. But yeah, I think it's hard to go on the road in college football. Like I feel like Clemson definitely put up the best performance of any of the road teams. Like that, it was almost a one-score game. Not for that terrible fourth down call. I don't know, just an awful decision on third and fourth down, right there at the goal line. Texas got the stop. But yeah, Clemson gave Texas a game. That's kind of the one I expected to be the closest, because I still wasn't sure what Texas was made of. But it kind of felt a little like obviously it was more high scoring than that Texas A&M game. But it kind of felt like that Texas A&M game, like they started to make it a blowout, but then they just didn't go away and they gave them a game. But yeah, I mean, I don't know necessarily what it says. I obviously gave my spiel about I don't think we should have a 12-team playoff. I think it should be 8. But I mean, it's just really hard to go on the road in college football against good teams and against the rankings. Like what were those? The 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th teams in the seeds, but those were really the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th teams in the actual rankings, you know. So those teams at home, like those are always going to be tough teams to beat.
I mean, we talk about these games and like Indiana just got drilled for their performance on Friday, but Notre Dame might be really good, and we'll see here in a week and a half against Georgia. I mean, they're favored against Georgia, as we'll get into here in a second. So I think it was just more of like Heupel did this where they punted inside enemy territory, and you're like, what are you doing? You're down 3 scores, and you're punting on like right around midfield on 4th and 4 for Tennessee. Like that was terrible. I didn't understand that one in the moment, but Indiana did a similar punt. They played super conservative. Like if you're going to talk all that talk, like Kurt Cignetti, you got to be aggressive, and they were not aggressive at all in that game. It's like nothing was really working, so I understood his logic after the postgame where it was like, only thing I really could trust was my defense, but it's also like you weren't going to get back in the game unless your offense had some kind of spark. So like I get that, but also you're in the playoff, you might as well just all systems go and
I get dunking on it with how kind of cocky he was pregame and everything like that, but yeah, it was kind of funny. The post game just be like, "Well, the offense wasn't doing anything anyway. We're just gonna just take a shot."
Well, I think Bud Elliott had a good point
on 4th and 10.
Well, I think Bud Elliott had a good point about Sig on the Cover 3 podcast, where it's like, don't you kind of need that at Indiana? Like part of the reason Indiana, like it's a terrible football school, like all time bad, terrible football school. Like you kind of need a guy who comes in here who's like, anybody, anytime. Like Google me. Like I think you kind of have to instill that because you're never gonna have the blue chip ratio talent to match up against Ohio State and Oregon year over year. So you kind of need like that kind of guy on the sideline who's like talking up and getting his guys to believe that they can go up against anybody. I think it's valuable. So I agreed with Bud's point there about like, I think it's actually good that Kurt Cignetti has like this brashness to him because I think it commands respect. And I think Indiana is a really hard job anyway. And I think part of why they were so successful year one was because they carried themselves like Cignetti, and obviously they lost to a better team.
That's fair. And like you're at Indiana, like it's not about convincing like the country that you're legit. It's about like convincing your fans that you actually have a legit football program. Like, hey, now people are at least talking about you online, and you're in the playoff, and you're doing something for Indiana football. So yeah, I mean, clearly this dude, he took it. He took the L. So I can't really say anything about it.
Well, then like the SMU. Okay. SMU didn't really get dominated in that game. Their quarterback just imploded. Like SMU, I don't know if you had the same takeaway, but I'm like, I don't think SMU really showed that they were outclassed. I think it was just more their quarterback had the worst game of his life at the worst possible time. Like the amount of interceptions, everything. SMU wasn't getting bullied around. Like Penn State's offense was not just like ripping up this team to shreds. I think there was a weird disconnect from people watching that game to me.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because like Tennessee, Ohio State, like it was 21-10 at half. Like in Ohio, Tennessee was getting the ball to start the third quarter. It's like it felt like we've seen games like with two good teams, like Georgia, Ole Miss, or something, where someone just dominates the other team. It doesn't mean it's an indictment on the programs or the playoff itself or the identity and everything. So we've seen those kind of games. The Ohio State Tennessee game felt like more of just like it felt like two good teams and one was dominating the other one. I felt like when I was watching Penn State SMU, I don't know, maybe it's the noon thing. It didn't feel like the same level of intensity of those other playoff games. And SMU was at least moving the ball, like to your point, like they were moving the ball, and then the pick sixes, that's the quickest 14-point swing you can have, So what was it, 14-0, like halfway through the second quarter, like Penn State's offense hadn't actually really done anything. Like they also would have converted that fourth down on the first drive where he has it with his legs, but he threw it to the end zone behind the receiver and he drops it. Like
also James Franklin going for it on fourth down early and like SMU immediately bailing out. Like James Franklin got away with that one. Like that was a crazy fourth down call.
Was that one of the pick sixes, or was that just an interception?
That was just an interception, I think.
Yeah, so it was did he throw 3 in this game?
He threw 3 and then he had a fumble, right?
Yeah, that was brutal. And he was talking pregame too about how cold he was. So I don't know. Maybe he showed his hand. He was serious. He couldn't play in that weather. But yeah, I know what you mean. I guess it was probably like it wasn't as dominant as some of those other games, even though the scoreline showed it.
Yeah. And then Texas, I mean, taking care of business against Clemson, but Clemson fought back. I thought that game was going to be a blowout, and Clemson, to their credit, fought back in the second half. I thought Cade Klubnik showed some stuff, and they just didn't have the horses, though. Like that one to me felt more like they didn't have the horses, and Texas just outhorsed them, especially in the second half when Clemson was trying to come back. But I think Clemson deserves credit for fighting back. I think they fought better than I thought they were in this game.
Yeah, I think Clemson. There's a scenario where they win this game, like how it played out. Like there's just certain plays being made.
Like you don't feel better about Texas, right? Like Texas did not instill. Like there's just still something weird about Texas to me.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I do think Texas is a good team, but it's tough to say.
They don't feel like a great team. They just feel very gettable, right? Like it just that one they should have just closed out. Georgia would have closed them out. Oregon, Ohio State. Like there's just still like the Quinn Ewers stuff a little bit for me. Like that shouldn't have gotten weird at the end, Like Clemson should not have had a chance to win that game.
Yeah, I mean, cut it to 7 with like 11 minutes left. Like it was definitely a game before that Jaden Blue like 80-yard touchdown run. Yeah, like they were right there, and that's why it's just kind of weird the way people talk about Texas, like they're number 1 team in the FPI and stuff, and like the defense is good, but in some of these good teams that Clemson's played, they've done absolutely nothing offensively. Like they scored 3 against Georgia. They scored, what was the final score? 14-10 over South Carolina. Was that this score? Like it was something in the teens, right? Yeah. Like they didn't do anything. I think they scored like 23 or something with like a garbage time touchdown against Louisville. Like this was definitely the most success they've had against any of the ranked teams they've played. Well, I'm not counting SMU, but I don't know what SMU is either, right? We put 2 ACC teams that we really don't even know how good they were, but Clemson definitely had a much better performance than SMU. But yeah, even when I still see Texas, like they're going to be favored to beat Arizona State, but I just don't know. They're going to get that close to the national championship game, and I still don't quite know what this team is made of.
I agree. Best second round matchup. Now that we have the bracket here for you, Matt Green, which one are you most excited about? Which one do you think is going to be the best game?
I think the one everyone's circling is easily Oregon, Ohio State, right? Like everyone wants to see that part 2 in the Rose Bowl too. Like it's like, can we just can this game remind us to like, wait, we should go back to the old conferences? Oregon and Ohio State played in the Rose Bowl, traditional Pac-12 Big Ten matchup. That's what that's the tradition the sport wants. But yeah, I mean, I felt like watching the Oregon Ohio State game, Ohio State ran out of time, right? Like the whole, also, can we call it cheating? I don't know. Got a flag called. It's basically cheating, right? They're going to change a rule that Dan Lanning did, having 12 guys on the field. Like, so kind of manipulated the game in a way there. But I felt like Ohio State was the better team. I also felt like maybe Ohio State learned something from this Tennessee game. I don't know how we went for 30, 40 minutes talking Tennessee, Ohio State and didn't mention Jeremiah Smith, who's like basically the best player in college football. Like, that dude is he looks like Julio Jones right now. Like he is just a absolute beast. Maybe that Tennessee game showed them a little something of like, this guy has to be involved. Whether you're giving them these crossing routes, going deep, like just find ways to get this guy the ball. So I felt like the first time these teams played in Oregon, in Eugene, that Ohio State may have been the better team. And so playing on a neutral site, like, I would not be surprised at all if Ohio State gives Oregon their first loss of the season.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. I'm not going to overreact yet because Oregon hasn't lost. They did beat Ohio State, and Ohio State's a good win. But let's see what Ohio State does and how it gets. Like, I don't know. I still lean Oregon in this matchup. I think Ohio State's going to be the sexy pick now that they played and Oregon was on a bye, so people are going to forget that Oregon's undefeated and also beat this team. But Ohio State looked the best of anyone this weekend, so I think that's just going to be on the forefront of everyone's mind. But the other game, and this is how we can wrap up here tonight, is Notre Dame, Georgia. I love that we're getting this again. The two games we had before were classics. The home and home years ago now. What was it, 2017 and 2019? Was that what it was?
Yeah.
And both were great games, very close and memorable. And I think Notre Dame's better than they were as a program, talent-wise, than they were 7 to 5 years ago. But I also I think with no Carson Beck, this line being -1 in favor of Notre Dame, I mean, obviously Georgia beating Notre Dame in a national title, there's some cool history here. I think this game is going to be very fascinating because I think it's going to be ugly. I think both teams are going to want to ground and pound, like the Jeremiah Love versus Nate Frazier and Trevor Etienne matchup, like Gunner versus Riley, both guys who want to run the football, kind of questionable passing. I'm curious how this game goes because I think it's going to be low scoring and I think it's going to be heavy hitting, just ground and pound, like both teams just trying to out physical the other. And I'm very excited to see how this game goes because I think it's a actual toss up. Like I'm glad we have a week and a half to think about this because I don't know which way I would go right now.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy how each time these teams have played, it's just increased the stakes just a little bit more. Like 2017, like when Georgia truly went and took over an opposing team stadium in 2017 at South Bend. But like that was like just a huge program changing because like Georgia's program changing game because Georgia's fans were kind of put on the forefront of like, wow, they take it seriously, went all the way up there. Then 2019, like I think Josh Brooks still talks about, like even with the national championships and everything, like a lot of people in the athletic department and administration and everything still talk about that 2019 Notre Dame game as like this just magical weekend where like the national spotlight was on Athens and everything. And it was just like the first game where they got the new lights and everything. And it was just an insane environment. And now it's to go to the Final Four of the college football playoff. Like each time these teams play, and both of those games were tough games that came down to like the final drive. So it's going to be interesting. I would say I would feel confident with Carson Beck as at quarterback in just terms of what we've seen out of this Georgia team through 13 games and like how battle tested they are. Like there's no one that's gone through it like this Georgia team this year. Like I was looking at a graphic that showed the playoff teams rank records this year versus other playoff teams. And half of the playoff field was like 0-1 against playoff teams on the year, if they even played one. And Georgia's 4-0 in those games. And no one else has really been battle tested like that. But Carson Beck was the one going through most of those battles. Gunnar Stockton at least does have that SEC championship game. And they have this defense is the ultimate wild card because this defense has had a couple games this year where they absolutely took over the Tennessee game, the 2 times you played Texas where you get 6-7 sacks. Like, they haven't really had the Clemson game, I guess, is another one too. They haven't had that many performances like that. So if they get that type of performance from the defense, I think there's a chance that Georgia just kind of changes their identity in the college football playoff. And that's obviously doesn't sound like a good thing to have to do. You're doing it out of necessity because you have a new quarterback. But would it surprise anyone if all of a sudden University of Georgia all of a sudden had a dominant running game? Like, we know they're recruiting 5 stars and 4 stars on the offensive line every year. We know about the talented running backs they have. If all of a sudden that running option from the quarterback comes in and is a factor, like you saw what it did against Texas in the second half. Like, that was Etienne, one of Etienne's most productive games the whole season. Also, Etienne was battling an injury to even get back for that Texas game. Georgia now has 3-4 weeks off. I think it's a really dangerous proposition to think that you could change your identity for the biggest game of the entire season. But if there's anyone that can do it, that has the talent, it feels like, and because they're kind of going back to what they traditionally want to do and be a run first team, maybe it's Georgia that finds a way to gut out a win against, a really physical team. Because I don't see this being, like you're saying, I don't see this being any kind of blowout or anything. Like, I really don't know what to expect from a Gunnar Stockton-led team for Georgia. But I think I like Georgia's chances for the guys to rally around them. But it's going to be an interesting one for sure.
And we'll dive in here in the coming week here on the pod with our official predictions and how we think this is going to go and all that good stuff. And I'm sure you'll talk about it on the Georgia Voice of College Football leading up to that over the next 2 weeks. But now we got a weird layoff. I don't love the layoff here, Matt Green.
Yeah, what is it, like 10 days?
Yeah.
9 days till the next one. Yeah, it'll be interesting. And Georgia's got to be that final game that's going to kick off at like 9:00 on January 1st. So yeah, we'll know exactly
Are you working the second?
What the field is. What's that?
Are you going to work the second or no?
Oh no, I'm off that day,
okay.
Sir. I can't do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll be going live post game instant reaction on the Georgia Voice of College Football for sure.
There you go. Matt Green, always a pleasure, and I'll talk to you in a couple days.
Yes, sir.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.